Hi, I'm Ashley Adamson. Welcome to Tea Time. Here we explore many topics, sometimes to do with trans and sometimes to do with personal growth. Normally it's a mix of both of those things. It's unedited and unscripted, so we do a lot of exploration. We go a lot of places. So get your cup of tea and we're gonna sit down and we're gonna chill for a little bit, talk about not man enough and not woman enough. This comment came in from one of you, TR, thank you for writing this, as a response to one of my videos last week. They say, I feel like I'm not man enough to meet her on role expectations anymore. They're referring to their wife. But I am not woman enough to actually normalize anything else in the way that they interact. So there's lots of imposter syndrome going around from both directions, and it sounds like you're experiencing something similar. I wanted to dive into this more, this idea of not feeling enough of the gender that you identify as. And this is probably a bigger issue as you transition because you're finding your space in yourself and the way that you communicate that space within yourself, your gender, your femininity, your masculinity, to that other person. And especially if you're already in a relationship, this can be double as hard because you have prior expectations to how that interaction works, what the frameworks and paradigms are for those nuances in your communication, and how you usually resolve those things. For example, if you get in an argument and you're the man in the relationship, maybe you close that argument with stepping forward and giving a hug or creating space for the woman to cry. But if you suddenly transition and now you're a woman and now there's two women in the relationship, who's the one that creates the space? Is it going to feel dysphoric for you to create the space for the woman to cry because now you're taking on a gender role that you previously did and now that's bringing up dysphoria? Have you been in a situation like that? Has that have you had any kind of situations where you felt not enough the gender that you are expected to be versus who you are, or the other way around, who you are versus who you're expected to be? In the transition, it's this big, uncomfortable feeling of not feeling completely who you are. I got this a lot with my voice. I felt like I had no voice. I felt like my voice didn't represent who I was. So even when I would speak, I would feel mute. And second of all, transitioning in a relationship when I was with a cis woman, it's difficult because I was holding the man space and now I don't want to hold that space anymore, but she still wants me to hold that space for being the masculine one, the one who's holding down the emotional space, the one that's providing the emotional support. That's the rock in the relationship. But I don't want to be that rock anymore. I have a lot of emotions to express because now it's more appropriate and acceptable for a woman to express that. Plus you throw in estrogen and suddenly it's like boom, right? You just put fuel on the fire. And so how do you navigate that? How do you move in a space where now your gender expectations are different and you're wanting to experience and express yourself in a different, new way? I think this is like quite a complicated thing to just be stuck in, and it's the good thing is it's not permanent. You move through it, right? How permanent is life? It's not permanent at all. So what I've done to kind of move through this icky space is to continue to iterate and test the waters and communicate things. Maybe I was the top in the relationship before as a man, but at some point I may be like, hey, this doesn't feel right anymore. Do you think we could change things? Do you think we could try something else? And just experimenting and trying new things can really help you find a new space. When I started transitioning in the bedroom with my partner who was a woman, I asked her to try being kind of more toppy energy, not to top me at the time, but more toppy energy. We started to play around with this, and as I supported her in finding more confident and masculine space within her, she actually took onto it and it seemed to work. We started to feel like that relationship fit better. So there's like potential ways to wiggle out of it, but that's, I think the important thing is to know that you can wiggle into new things. It just takes time to express. And one of my favorite ways of working and talking through things is to know how to express without being accusational. A lot of the times people say you when they express something. When you do this, this happens and it feels like you're doing this to me. That's like a typical abstraction of when you have conversations like this. And these are the parts that will push people into being defensive. If I said to you, we were in a relationship, I said, you said this the other day and it really felt like you didn't care what we were talking about and it kind of hurt my feelings. Like that sounds pretty good, but I just said you a bunch of times and now I've put you on the back foot. So maybe communicating your needs around these things is to also step out of the accusational space and just get rid of the word you as much as possible and just replace it with your feelings. I feel. This is something fundamental to nonviolent communication, and if you want to look up more on it, there's plenty of materials, but this is just a fundamental that I've used that's been super helpful, is to just say, hey, you remember that moment that we had last week where this was said? I just avoided you right there. I felt like this wasn't an okay thing for me to do, and it felt like I was, it felt like it was a little dismissive, and I wasn't sure, and this is the next part, I wasn't sure if it was meant that way. So I've just done a few things. So first, I avoided you. Second of all, I've talked about my feelings, so I've created a perspective of just my experience, which is going to promote empathy. And third, I closed it with, it's not certain what happened and what I perceived. So I'm not accusing you of anything because I'm not saying it was anything in particular. It just felt like that. And that magic combo right there will work wonders because two people are two realities. And when you have your reality, not imposing that onto the other person really helps you create a shared reality. So I say, I'm not sure that this happened, or I don't know, I could be wrong. By doing that, you can allow them to fill the space and help you create clarity and tweak that. That's like a really powerful thing you can use in any relationship. I don't know, what do you think? I could be wrong. See what I did there? So that was something that's really powerful that I'd love to share with you to move through that process. Also, clearing the space within your own being, that one's pretty big. I have a meditation on this. I think it's called Finding Your Inner Voice, and it's about clearing out the space within you and finding your voice. And I think this is a really powerful technique, which is to just realize that sometimes your own projections and expectations of your own gender can really block you from expressing and being who you actually are. When you acknowledge that you're transgender, you give yourself the space to then start changing clothes, start changing expressions, and start changing the way that you step into the world and into yourself. But there's way more nuanced ways of you self-imposing your own expectations of your gender. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but how do you wake up in the mornings? How do you move? How do you look in the mirror? How do you pick up your phone? How do you respond to something on your phone? How do you point to something? Is it a masculine? Is it a feminine energy? What kind of energy is it? If you're like me, then you're used to doing things as a routine, such as this is how I wake up, this is how I brush my teeth, etc., etc. But these little routines can also be reinforcing of old habits. And if you've been, let's say from my experience, if you've been a man most of your life, you've ingrained into your brain certain behaviors that reinforce that you are a man, even though you may have not consciously done that. I find that all the time with my back. Like if I sit in a certain posture, I feel like this sense of strength and manliness come to me because I was very proud of my back muscles. I know, it's so dumb. And I actually like my back muscles more now because I'm working on them, but that's another thing. And so when I even change my posture, I notice that my awareness and my perception of my body and how I project onto it changes my experience. So I'm not sure how that relates in your own experience, and I'd love to hear, but I kind of want to point this out. Look at how you project your own perception of yourself onto yourself. Where do you do it? It's super subtle. If you meditate, if you do mindfulness, you may notice it. If you don't do mindfulness exercises, you may not notice it because you'll be so wrapped into your own story and believing it, you may not see it. Just look for it. It's super subtle, but there are just ways that you reinforce yourself. And if you're habitually reinforcing yourself under one paradigm, there's a lot of things to untangle. And the further you get in, the more nuanced and subtle it becomes because you have the capacity to work on it. When you start out on your transition, you try to work on the most obvious things like your voice or the way you dress. Those are like low-hanging fruit. It's very easy to go out there and buy a dress if you want to change genders and you're moving to a woman. It's a lot harder to examine how you move in the morning and how you can change that so that way it changes the way that you reinforce who you are. I have a theory that with the neural network that you have, since you've ingrained it under a certain gender paradigm and it becomes so deep, like your subconscious, because your brain just wants to build these really deep routes that are short in terms of the neurons firing, so it's very easy, it requires less energy. They're also ingrained with a certain gendered experience. And those ones that run really deep, you have to, like you can rewire them under a new gender experience. But that takes time and effort and repetition. And that's the bigger nuance in how you shift from this space of feeling like an imposter and feeling like it's not exactly you to being more comfortable in you. So those are just a few thoughts. I probably have many more, but I wanted to share that with you. And I'd love to hear what's been going on for you in terms of how you've moved yourself into your transition or into your other side. Let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Maybe there'll be another topic that's inspired. And thanks for checking in today. I'll see you tomorrow. Tschüss.